Good morning, everyone. What you just saw on the screen is one of the results of the survey BTB organized 2 months before this Congress. The results are clear. 84% of the people who answered the survey find that cooperation between unions on an international level is very important. Now, this morning, I have here on stage with me Livia Spera, the General Secretary of the European Transport Workers Union, ETF, and Steve Cotton, the General Secretary of the International Transport Workers Federation. So welcome, Livia and Steve. Livia, can I ask you the first question? What is the importance of trade union work on an international level? What can we, as BTB, do for ETF? And what can ETF do for the Belgian transport workers? And how can we convince other trade unions to engage more in international trade union work?
So good morning, comrades, and it's a real pleasure to be here. As I said earlier, BTB is my union, so I'm very humbled to be able to speak at your Congress. I think Jacques, Marc, and Frank were very clear in their introductory speeches. I don't think that we can do without international trade unionism. We live in the European Union, is made of 27 countries. There is a big internal market where people and goods are free to circulate with no limits and with almost no social net, which means that we need to be there. We need to be there to counterbalance also the very liberal structure that the European Union, that the European countries have given to this political project that was supposed to be also something else when it was thought many, many years ago. So our position, our work there is essential. And then if we look at transport, this is even more true because it was said earlier what happened during COVID to the seafarers, to the truck drivers. Our sectors mainly know no borders, and so it's a duty for us, it's an obligation for us to be there, to cooperate with each other and to make sure that phenomena like social dumping or exploitation of people in this very diverse context is not there. I could give you thousands of examples, and when you ask me what could BTB do more, I think BTB is one of the most engaged unions. We have borrowed your president for a while, but also in terms of your engagement, I can give you thousands of examples of where BTB made a difference together with the others. I worked for many years in the ports, as you know, and BTB was always there to support the comrades that were having problems in other ports. Also, ports have no borders. The ports in the port of Antwerp and Zeebrugge and Ghent are competing with the ports in the North Range. For the other parts of the transport sector is the same, so it's an obligation for us. There is also a more romantic part of it, I would say, which is, as trade unionists, we must be internationalists. The trade union movement was born as the first, one of the first internationalist movements because solidarity knows no borders. So I think we have a clear duty there. If we look in Ukraine, what's happening with the war, I think trade unions were the first, and the ETF and the ITF in particular were the first to be able to help even faster than member states because we have our networks and we have our contacts and we could deliver what really matters for the workers there. But I think I could speak 1 hour about it because I think there are many other reasons why, but I think we will be able to talk about it also during our conversation later.
Okay. So, Steve. Next question for you. Transport work has changed significantly over the last decades, so also the jobs of the transport workers have changed. However, the transport sector is not a very popular sector to work in. We often hear complaints about bad working conditions, low salaries, too much flexibility, long working hours, even harassment and violence on the work floor. So this leads also to a labor shortage in the transport sector. What is your opinion on that?
Thanks, Veronique. Good morning, everyone. Can I extend my congratulations to the 3 wise men at the side there, and fantastic opening. So I think there was a mention about hope, which I will come to. transport has had it hard. The reality is, if you look at the capitalist system, it's all about cutting costs, shaving as much profit from every product. So our challenge in transport, and we spoke about the pandemic, is to get recognition for the value of what we do. And it's very clear to us in the ITF and the ETF that big business hasn't factored us in, and I welcome the partnership with the metal workers. The reality is we're all part of a global supply chain, and we have to basically advocate to the multinationals, to governments, that they must create good jobs. Our position is there are a lot of good jobs in transport, but you have to pay. And again, recommendations, clarifications, BTB has been one of the most dynamic unions in securing not just pay increases, but social benefits. So our challenge is to get governments, employers to recognise our societies do not function without transportation. Never more highlighted than during the pandemic. How do we deal with that? So the question is, when we talk about digitalisation, fantastic survey, but the fundamental principle is people work for money, people work for security, people work to provide for their families. So the challenge for us is, how do we make sure in this transition of whether it's challenges about automation, modernisation, digitalisation, how do we make sure your jobs are the best jobs? And I think it comes down to power. How do we advocate? How do we argue? And just to follow the last question, it'd be difficult for me not to be super positive about internationalism. And there's many former leaders of BTB here. This country, this union has been part of trying to set global standards. And our challenge now when it comes to transportation, global north, global south, it doesn't matter. Transport workers have the same challenges wherever they fit, in whichever part of the world. So the job for us in the ITF, the ETF, the leaders of the unions, sympathetic politicians, is to make sure that we're valued. And I think the biggest issue that comes down to this is about respect. How do we make sure employers, governments respect transport workers, whether you're in public transport, the metro, whether you're the airports? Look at the dramatic impact on people's lives when they couldn't move from one part of the world to the other, and we're seeing massive cost. Veronique told me not to talk too much. I'm answering all the questions in one go. The reality is, having strong leaders, having confidence, having political allies, we will change the face of transport, and we will improve the jobs, because we have to. Societies do not exist without transport workers.
That's true. That's what we saw during COVID also. Livia, Team Up for Fair Transport is the slogan of our Congress. How can we speed up the transition to fair transport?
So I think that's a $1 million question, but I think the slogan is very, I find very inspiring, because I think there's no other way to fight for fair transport other than teaming up. And teaming up in our countries, teaming up among the different categories of workers we represent, teaming up at the international level as well. Mm-hmm. I think there is so much we have to work on. Steve talked about a shortage of good jobs, improving working conditions, which is key to reduce this shortage and to attract more people, more women, more young workers, to reduce precarity and so on. So there are so many dimensions we have to work on. But I think we have good examples already. That have to inspire us, and that we have to keep doing what we have done. Recently, one big example, you have all heard about the 2 strikes, and one of them was concluded a couple of days back in Grevenhausen in Germany, where a very brave group of the truck drivers coming from Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Georgia, decided to go on strike on their own because they had unpaid wages and because of their really unfair working conditions. And ETF and ITF stepped in. BTB was also on the front line to help them and to support them. And this really gave us an opportunity to show to policymakers and to the general public who's delivering the goods that they are using, the status of the sector, how we allowed the sector to go down over the last decades. And I think this is a classical example where we have teamed up with all our resources and everybody did what he or she could. Last week we were in Spain at the executive committee of the ETUC, and we had another very inspiring speech from the Spanish Ministry of Labor, who was very close, Yolanda Diaz, who was very close to the trade unions. And she said something that I think we always have to keep in mind. I think she often says it in her speeches. Trade unions have to be with one foot in the workplace and one foot in the Council of Ministers, one foot in the street, and one foot on the official journal. And I think this is also about teaming up. This is also about understanding that we have to act everywhere. Lobbying, just lobbying is not enough. Just being only in the streets or at workplace is not enough. And that's also why, by the way, we have tried to change the ETF. We've tried to make it a real trade union that is able to connect the workplace, the fights in the street, with the work that we are doing politically. So I think it's a very, very crucial issue to try to link all these dimensions and to try to link all the strengths we have at the different levels.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Steve, question for you again. Difficult one. Sustainability and the call for a greener world. Transport is in most cases pointed at as one of the most polluting sectors. We have shipping, we have road transport, we have aviation. Does this mean that these jobs in the transport sector are threatened?
So that's a very tricky question. I think the reality is, as with everything, we have a responsibility to understand what does that actually mean. So if we look at the shipping sector, we've built a coalition with the employers, which we call a Just Transition. About approximately, seafaring community is a very small one actually, nearly 2 million workers. 800,000 of those people will need to be reskilled. And we're basically saying the employers have got to pay for it. But we also need to understand the business models about whether they're going for first phase LNG, whether they move ammonia, whether they move to hydrogen. And of course it impacts on every port worker, truck driver, who's going to carry these goods and what are those health and safety challenges. So I think the ITF's position, it's one of our key themes, in fact, sustainable transport, started very much with urban transport, greening cities, supporting public transport, investing capital, making buses electric. And I think we've seen the first phase, we were very nervous that what would happen to the support staff that run buses, but actually they're being reskilled. So the challenge for us in each sector, civil aviation will also come with alternative fuels, and how will that impact ground handling? Issue is we have to understand what's happening, and then we need to be at the table discussing with employers or government, whoever's regulating the transition, how to make sure our men and women, our young workers, are upskilled. So our challenge is to understand what is happening and then be in a position to say, you've got to pay to upskill them. It's not get rid of the jobs, it's how do we upskill? And it could be, if you link that with technology, that some of the jobs could be better jobs, could be higher paid jobs. But I think our message is very strong to employers that we have to be at the table defining what the new skills are. And then there's one other thing, and again, Livia talked about the coalition and teaming up. Right now, most of the world's retailers are very sensitive to the climate change scoring. So they have to produce annual reports. Their finance is linked to whether they're green. We have a relationship with DHL, and their annual report says what are their emissions, what are their health and safety issues. So we need to understand these strategies, because that way we can say Human rights are a fundamental part of supply chains, sustainability, and we can be part of that process to register. So I think, when we look at the fantastic history of BTB and the international labour movement, we adapt, and we will adapt to the sustainable transport, and we will continue to advocate for power for workers to make sure they're at the table and they protect their jobs.
Okay. So I have one last question for you, Livia. In June of next year, there are European elections, and we already see the tendency of people voting far right, more and more. So this also means that we'll have more and more right-wing governments in Europe. How can ETF do something about that? Can you influence?
So yeah, that's another complex
$1
question. So Frank said in one of his speeches earlier that 85% of the legislation that that is applying to us as citizens, as workers, come from Europe, from the European Union. And this gives, it's a very simple figure that gives an idea of the importance of having the right people in the buildings down a few kilometers away from here. We as ETF, last year, we had our Congress, we adopted a strong action plan, which was proposed by a group of unions within the ETF that identify themselves as leftists, which are our left-wing group, and they really asked the Congress, and the Congress approved to put forward an action plan to contribute to the fight against far right and to campaign for European election for those parties that are listening to our demands and that are close to transport workers. So we are doing this. We are very busy at the moment, and this is where I will appeal to you. There will be a number of initiatives that we will try to do in all our countries at workplace with the political parties, but also we will organize with the ETUC a big demonstration on the 13th of December, where it will be very important to have all of you. It will be very important to have a very strong demonstration there, and I know that probably Miranda will have a few words about this later. I think the role of the BTB there is key. Because some other unions are saying that, in fact, in Belgium there's no austerity and everything goes well, and so it's very difficult to mobilize. I think there we have to show that European workers and the European transport workers in particular are asking a different Europe, because mostly austerity measures that also apply to Belgium come from Europe, come from the European economic policy. So what do we have to do? We have to talk to the workers. Abstentionism is a huge problem in Europe, and especially for the European election. I know in Belgium it's compulsory to vote, and I know that there are also national elections, so this, of course, helps to get more people to vote, but we also need to vote for the right parties, because it's not true that all parties are the same. And if we look at how far-right, for instance, members of European Parliament have voted on social legislation, on transport legislation, they have not voted in favor of the workers we represent. They have not voted in favor of your rights. And so we need to keep this in mind. We need to tell to our comrades at work what the reality is. There is a big difference. And I think one very important thing, and I think, again, Belgium can be an example there, is the need to keep a cordon sanitaire. The cordon sanitaire is not there anymore in many countries, and we see that this is the only way to block the far right, to isolate the far right. And in Europe, there is a big risk that this cordon sanitaire will be broken after or around the election. And I think we have a duty to do this, because today in Europe, trade unions are the only organizations that have a big membership. Political parties have lost their membership. We are the only organization that is able and ready to reach out to masses. And so I think, again, we have no choice, and I look forward to all your involvement and contribution to this very difficult and important work that we're going to do over the next months.
Okay. Thank you very much for this conversation. There are a lot of challenges for the transport world, for the transport workers, but if only we team up, we can face them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.